All right. Hello, everybody. Time to talk about Chapter 9. Notice the title here, Evidence-Based Fraud Examination. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to take a pretty in-depth look at evidence, what constitutes evidence, and other items related to an investigation based on fraud. Okay? All right, so, when you think about investigation, in this case, the accountant is almost like they're playing the game Clue. And for those of you that have played that game Clue, that's, the butler did it with the candlestick in the library type thing. So notice what we're looking for. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. So essentially the job is to put together the storyline as to what's happening. So notice, look at what they tell you. The answers need to be woven in to a coherent story. So, believe it or not, when you're doing this type of work, you're looking for certain things, and then you're having to create this scenario as best you can based on the evidence as to why things happen, who did it, how it happened. Notice, you need to make a compelling case. Notice, evidence-based. This is not about guessing. This is taking the evidence that you have, collecting it, making sure it's verifiable, and then put it together in some sort of storyline. Okay. Notice you also need alternative hypotheses. So it's not just enough to say this is absolutely the way it happens. When you're evaluating this evidence, you also have to look at what are other possible reasons. Okay. So notice you're looking to identify flaws in your own case. Okay. Because that's what's going to happen in a courtroom. Okay. When you go out there and tell them, or, in the job line, when you go out there and tell them this is what happened, they're going to look to see, is that the way it happened, or is there some other thing that could have happened? And then you need to have this matrix together where you're collecting the data and how strong it is, okay? In order to start this type of investigation, here's a term that you'll definitely need to know: predication. Predication is basically having sufficient information to begin an investigation. Okay, so in other words, there has to be a reason. So predication means evidence to provide a reason. Okay, you can't just have people going off on innuendo with no evidence. Okay. Notice it's considered the starting point, okay? And this is key right here. Notice, suspicion without evidence, without corroborating evidence, is not sufficient. So it's not just enough to say, I think this happened. You have to have the suspicion and some evidence along with it, okay? Notice they also mentioned a few red flags. Listen, a red flag definitely needs to be looked at, obviously, but that's not enough. And notice the red flags, just because something odd happens doesn't mean it was fraudulent. It requires additional audit work, okay? So just because, wow, this looks strange, or this journal entry doesn't look right, or it looks like it could be attempting to hide something, it could simply be an error, okay? So you have to make sure. You can't go around accusing people of things and you can't really investigate until you have enough reasoning behind it. Okay? This one you've probably heard about before, the fraud triangle. Okay? So the fraud triangle, and here's the three items right here: opportunity, some sort of pressure, and then rationalization. So notice it says, what causes good people to turn bad? Okay? Now, not everybody will do this, but given the right circumstances, a lot of times people can go off in the wrong way. Opportunity, and by the way, these are pretty much what they sound like. If you remember from a regular audit class or whatever, opportunity just means that there is an opportunity there. Maybe some hole in the internal controls, maybe something where you're supposed to have separation of duties and you don't have it. That's the idea of opportunity. Perceived pressure? Maybe a gambling problem, maybe a divorce, maybe some need for money, medical bills, okay? Some sort of pressure to do it. And then rationalization, this could be any number of items. Everybody does it. The company didn't treat me right. They underpaid me, so I'm going to steal from them. Things along these lines. I meant to pay the money back, okay? So the fraud triangle. And again, all of these things are working simultaneously. Another related to the fraud triangle is this acronym MICE. And this helps to explain what's going on. So if you're wondering, well, what would be the reason somebody would do this? Money, I think, is probably the obvious one here, right? People do it for money. It could also, at times, people could be coerced into doing the wrong thing. This idea right here of coercion, your boss told you you had to do it, okay? That could happen as well. Somebody could get sucked into something like this and never mean to. Ego, you see somebody over here looking all fancy, show them who's smarter, okay? And then ideology, the ideology one here, what they're looking at is you have a certain mindset, a certain belief system. Like maybe your belief system is everybody's going to cheat, so I'm going to do it too. That's your ideology. Okay, so when you're looking for reasons to do it, MICE fits in with the fraud triangle. Okay? Now, remember when you're looking at this, so let's say you find some errors in the books. So the question then becomes, was this an error or was it fraud? And here's the big issue right here. Intent. Okay? Intent. This is the key thing. In order to have fraud, you have to have intent. So if you're looking for fraud, one of the things you'll need to prove is intent. So you have to, the investigator, notice here, has to prove that this was, somebody did it intentionally. Okay? This wasn't just a mistake. And again, it has to be with evidence. Not because we think they did it, but we can show they did it. There's a pattern, something going on. And notice this right here. Intent is the difference between mistake and fraud. Okay? Mistakes happen. They happen all the time. They're not all fraud. Another thing you have to look at as you're doing this investigation is there's 3 elements of fraud, and they're all important. The first one is the act itself. Now, the act itself, again, this could be an error. So when you first looked at it, you see the act. Okay, so the books were off by $100,000. Now the question is, was it a mistake or was it fraud? In order to prove that, notice concealment. Was there an attempt to conceal it? The concealment starts to look like fraud. Okay? And then the conversion means to convert it into some sort of benefit for the person. Okay? So notice all 3 of these have to happen in order to have fraud. So first of all, the act, it could have been a mistake, it could have been fraud. Was there an attempt to conceal it? Once you have an attempt to conceal it, it starts to look a lot more like fraud. And then was there an attempt at conversion, meaning converting the ill-gotten gains into something for the perpetrator? Okay? So what is evidence? So you're going to have some homework and stuff regarding this. What is evidence? Notice, here you go. And again, we're not lawyers, so oftentimes you have to work with a lawyer to make sure anything that is legally admitted and relevant, here's the key, relevant to the case. Okay? It has to be able to be admitted, legally admitted, and relevant to the case. Okay? Without evidence, there's no proof. There are a couple things. Federal rules of evidence, okay, so again, we're not attorneys, so oftentimes we have to rely on them for their help. And then 3 types of evidence. You'll have some homework questions on these. Testimony, real evidence, and then demonstrative or demonstrative, okay? And then it can either be direct or circumstantial, all right? So we're going to talk about all of these items, and again, reading this in your textbook, it'll help bring it all together. All right, folks, that's it, part 1 from chapter 9. We'll be back with part 2 in just a moment.